certain qualities can just cannot be measured. It's hard to measure the things like a person's ability to learn or curiosity, or as simple as just communicating with the teammates. If you don't ask questions, you're not going to grow, especially if you're a new hire. That willingness to grow alongside technology, I think, is the kind of mindset is needed in today's data roles. Just answer the question the way you feel it rather than how the machine feels it. Hiring is very personal, and yeah, like, you're hiring the person and not the machine, as I'm saying.
We are live with Mrunal on the Objective Hiring Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It is our sincere pleasure. And I would love to kick off our conversation today with a bit of an observation that I've made over the past few years. And that is that, there's a lot of companies out there who will claim to be very data-driven, very informed by data, and a lot of data leaders themselves who would be in their day jobs, either running product analytics or marketing analytics or sales analytics, and will be kind of preaching the value of data. But then when it comes to hiring, almost take off the data cap and put on another cap, the more kind of intuitive, gut feel based cap. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts over why that is the case, in why we move towards this kind of intuitive hiring decision process rather than taking a data-driven one.
I think the reason it goes to the gut feeling when it comes to hiring, it's because certain qualities can just cannot be measured. It's hard to measure the things like a person's ability to learn or curiosity, or as simple as just communicating with the teammates. So this kind of qualities doesn't show up on CV, and it's not something like we can measure through technical test. So yeah, I think that's why it's more of a gut feeling. But again, I'm not saying it should be totally biased to gut feeling as well. I think that should be a right balance between where you can use the data and where you can use the gut feeling.
Yeah, and I feel like for a lot of these, let's say, more subjective elements in hiring, let's say not the technical skills, which are a bit more objective, but maybe a combination of the softer skills and the, let's say, cultural fit, most companies would call it. They are, inherently a bit more subjective in that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to communicate. But I still tend to find that a lot of hiring managers would take, on a spectrum of gut feel to data driven, a very gut feel based approach where maybe there's some opportunities to use data to make it a bit more objective, even if it is inherently subjective. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can use data in, now that you've said that. So, for example, in if they have an experience where they have given, let's say, presentations, or just like being on a podcast as well, like that could be a way of telling, okay, they have some soft skills or subjective skills. So, yeah, I think that kind of assessment can still be can be used as a data driven side.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where AI will take this actually, because I feel like maybe one of the benefits of large language models is they're good at dealing with unstructured data. And so maybe in the future, there'll be a process where you could get a more holistic view of a candidate, look at maybe their GitHub profile, podcast they've done, a Medium blog article they've written. If there's some kind of way to automatically aggregate or grade that, maybe that will be something that happens in the next few years.
It depends on what parameters the model is being trained on. So a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues gave me a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. I'm not sure if you read that, but it had a lot of examples in different industries, like how the models have affected the outcomes. So if we are talking about hiring, it was like the automated system unintentionally introduced biases and filtered out great candidates. So, because they had seen in the past that only people from certain colleges were great candidates, so they were just picking those colleges, for example, or men, even women, because men were, for example, very high, and then that's why just it was filtering out women. So, I think the parameters considered in that model is, I think, very important. So, carefully designing the system. I think that's the takeaway.
Yeah, for sure. We don't want to unleash some hellish future with AI ruling everything. Um, I feel like, though, in hiring in particular, the current scenario, the current way hiring is done is, in my view, so biased that it's hard to imagine how introducing AI would make it worse. So I'll give you an interesting example. There's been a lot of experiments over the past 10 years in different countries. I know there's been these experiments in Australia, America, England, where the researchers will apply to different roles with different companies with CVs, with the only real difference among the sets of CVs being the name that's on the CV. So there was one in Australia, I think 2022, Sydney University had several thousand CVs in three groups. One group had Anglo first and last name. The second group had Anglo first name, Chinese last name. Third group had Chinese first and last name. Otherwise, the sets of CVs were pretty similar, and there were thousands of them. They then applied to tens of thousands of jobs around Sydney and Melbourne and measured the rate at which the applications got a callback. And so for the first group, which had the white first and last name, they got a 12% callback rate. The last group, which had the Chinese first and last name, got a 4% callback rate. So if you apply for a job in Australia with a Chinese name, you have one third the chance of a callback compared to white name, all else equal, which is appalling, let's be honest. And so I feel like hiring is one of those things that's already so biased by humans that it would have to be a pretty bad AI system, in my view.
Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah. I think it shouldn't be based on any kind of demographics or the person's personality or whatever it is that defines that person, but just based on the skills and the qualities that person have.
Well, for let's say hiring managers and companies who are taking a very intuitive approach to hiring. So let's say their idea of hiring is, all right, let's do a quick coffee chat with someone and just get a feel for them, do like a vibe check, and everything's very subjective, and they just get a sense of whether or not they like the person or not. If that's their hiring approach, is there benefits to them sitting down and saying, well, actually, no, like what can we measure in this process? We decide we want communication skills. Maybe we could start to define what that is and measure it. Would there be some benefits to moving at least a little bit towards the data driven end of the spectrum, do you think?
Yeah, definitely, because it helps with the initial screening process. If there are thousands of applicants, you're not going to sit with each and every one of them and have a coffee, right? It's not financially feasible as well. And also, everyone's time is valuable. So, I think the initial screening process is where the data driven approach can help. And then, if you like that person, then you can have, in person interviews because as we have talked about as well in our introductory call, soft skills are equally important to technical skills.
And speaking of those soft skills, like how do you personally make that trade off between the technical and soft skills? Are you looking for a combination of both? If you had to choose one, which one would you choose? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Great question. So, as you know, we are a startup, and the members of our analytics team have to wear multiple hats, working as a data analyst one day and then maybe a data science or engineering project the next. So, this kind of adaptability, I think, needs a balance between a technical expertise and communication skills so that the team is aligned. But again, I'm not saying that it should be a 50-50% split. No, not at all. But at least like 10 to 20% of the candidate's overall profile. At least they should be able to talk with their teammates or be proactive, ask questions. Because, like, I cannot stress enough on this asking questions. If you don't ask questions, you're not going to grow, especially if you're a new hire, right? To catch up quickly in an environment, especially if it's a startup, which is fast paced and more like a collaborative environment, asking questions is really important. Like, that's the first thing I always tell my team or the new hires: there are no silly questions. So, yeah, so it should be a balance.
And what about startups versus large organizations then? Because you're kind of touching on it then. Are there any aspects or any bits of the data professional that are going to be a little bit different between those two organizations or anything different that you look for?
Yeah, so I feel having worked in both MNC and now in a startup, I see that in startups, you are looking for generalists. So as we talked, wearing multiple hats, and then people who can learn quickly or adapt to evolving needs. Because we often hire recent graduates. They are a great fit because they are still exploring their career paths, and can discover that, like whether they prefer a data analyst when they're working on an analyst project or a science or engineering. So I feel at TV Adsing, at least, I've seen this kind of a flexibility of recent graduates as a strong advantage. But when we talk about the larger organizations, I think they look for specialists, that like person, a data engineer with this technical stack and so on. If that person comes into a startup, I don't think that person will like working, because he or she has to work on different kind of projects as well.
I guess maybe also part of the clash might be just rate of change. Like in a large organization, typically on average, they operate a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical. Everything's a bit more planned out, whereas startup has that level of chaos that certainly isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, I wouldn't have thought.
True, like, yeah, you have touched exactly on the right point. That's definitely true. And some people are just built for startups, I feel. Like, some people like to innovate, always try to think out of the box, bring in different perspective. For example, as you said, it is slow in the larger organizations. But in startups, if, for example, we are doing a process in a certain way, but a new person comes in, say, okay, we actually can do it in a better way. So that transition or change the processes very quickly and efficient.
And in your hiring process, how do you currently try to coax out those people who you feel like could be a good fit in that startup kind of environment as opposed to ones who might struggle to adapt?
Good question. So, I think by just talking. So, after initial CV screening, when the person comes in for interview, we just talk about, like, have you done anything outside your curriculum? That just shows that the person has the will to grow or learn new things, because even if we are hiring a recent graduate, where they are very good at technical and soft skill, there's always a missing part, which is getting to know the industry. We are an ad tech company, so that will always be a missing piece in that candidate's profile. So having, if we see that person is okay, have the ability to learn, we know, okay, that person is going to be okay in the company. So yeah, so I think from just talking and seeing what they have done, and how they approach things, how they solve problems, I feel it's not necessarily, if a question is asked, it's not necessarily that they have to solve it, but just the approach tells more about the person.
I feel like it's hiring is one of those things where the more transparent we are on both sides as soon as possible, the better it is for everyone because the kind of environment you offer is going to be amazing for some candidates and probably dreadful for others. It would either be your dream job or your worst nightmare. And so the sooner we have these conversations in the process and the more forthright we are, more transparent, I feel like it's just saves everyone a lot of time.
No, definitely setting expectations right is like the one of my biggest learning during the hiring process.
And what about AI then? So this is, I guess, the buzziest of buzzwords probably in the history of the world. And it seems as though it's impacting every industry, every domain in some way, shape, or form. What about in terms of hiring? Have you started to dabble with AI for hiring? Have you seen candidates use AI in the hiring process at all?
Um, so we don't currently use AI or automation in our initial hiring process. But as I said, I think it will be helpful for the initial CVs screening process, at least, given the systems are designed really well. But in terms of any skills, I just feel since the Gen AI being the major focus on the AI hype curve, if I had to hire someone now and needed AI as a skill, I wouldn't specifically look for it, because, as we just said, it's a buzzword. AI is not something new. So if a candidate possesses a solid fundamental, or foundation skills in machine learning or natural language processing, let's say, because we use LLMs, that would be enough for me. So to give you a quick example of what's happening or what happened in our team recently. So when we worked on a CTV match, which is, by the way, our new product, which we recently launched, and we developed it using Gen AI. So even though the team lacked proficiency in it, once they identified that LLM is something that solves the problem, they quickly learned those new concepts to bring the product to life, right? So that willingness to grow alongside technology, I think, is the kind of mindset is needed in today's data roles.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot at the moment. And I think it's one of those points in history where because the technology is changing so quickly, like at a breathtaking pace. I mean, OpenAI has got their 12 days of Christmas thing going at the moment, where it seems like every day is like, wow, that's quite substantial. And they're just one of the businesses. So I feel like in this environment, maybe it's even more important than normal to have that growth mindset, that adaptability, that willingness to learn, because your skill set can almost be, it feels like your skill set could almost be redundant in a few weeks. Like that's how quickly things are changing. And so you really have to find those candidates who are keen to learn. Do you have like a kind of perfect interview question or a particular technique where you try to coax out that, that ability or willingness to learn? Because I feel like it's it's very easy for candidates to talk about, oh, I like to learn, I like to do this and that, but like, how do you really know? You got any secret sauce?
Oh, I haven't found it yet. I'll let you know as soon as I do. But I feel just asking them how they approach. So, for example, they're working on a project and but they don't know anything about it, like what to use or what not to use, and how do they approach that? Their research process and the different steps that they go through. I think that is a good like first step to just to know if that person has that keen to grow or ability to learn. But it's very difficult to measure, to be quite honest.
So we identified this a couple of years ago as our single most important value that we were looking for in candidates was just a willingness to learn new things, because we figured that it's a startup, stuff changes all the time, our tech stack changes, our problems change, our solutions. So we just needed people who were adaptable, kind of like the current environment, maybe not as extreme. And so we were also thinking about this. What we landed on, which has its pros and cons, was we thought like a lot of interviews are very much focused on candidates talking about things they've done and like having examples, that behavioral style interviews. But I feel like the challenge with those is that it's talk is very cheap, can't really validate that they did those things, and it's just a really good storyteller could come up with some very convincing examples of how they've demonstrated X, Y, or Z. And so what we wanted to do was have a way for them to actually demonstrate it, like to do the thing that we're asking them to do. So in terms of learning new skills, in our project that we gave them, these are software engineers, we asked them to build this little algorithm, but in the R, like R, the statistical programming language, because we knew none of them would know that because they're engineers, they don't write R. And so it was an interesting experiment to see, like, oh, would some of them say, I'm not interested in that. Why would I want to learn R? R's a dumb language. They would all be kind of red flags for their lack of growth mindset. And then if they just couldn't figure it out, like they couldn't download and install the packages, they couldn't run it, they just couldn't hack it out. I feel like that would have been a bad indicator for their ability to then learn new other things. So that's the closest we came to this, but of course that involves giving them a whole project, and it's kind of unrepeatable. You can't scale it across other roles, unfortunately.
Yeah. But I think with ChatGPT now, that might have made things easier. Someone can just add in ChatGPT, tell me how to write this in R and get the output. So yeah, it's making it difficult and difficult.
Yeah, and I guess the other way to look at that is maybe now candidates' ability to learn new things is, for any candidate, is now easier. Like now that large language models have given you a baseline skill in anything, really, anything that involves writing, um, uh, then maybe, yeah, maybe any person's ability to learn something new should now be easier than ever, I guess, if you've got this magical machine to turn your attention to.
No, true, true. But I don't think it's still fully reliable. I know it has come a long way, like the since first ChatGPT version and now. But given that it cannot still tell that if there's an M in Canada or not, then I don't think it's still at that level. But definitely can help person point in certain way, in certain direction.
Yeah, it still feels like at the moment, right now, but things are changing quickly, that probably the best use case is to use it for something you're already a domain expert in, but just allows you to do it 10 times faster rather than using it on something you have no idea about at all.
Couldn't agree more. Yes, because we need to spot the errors as well, whatever that ChatGPT generates. So yeah, having at least a certain bit of expertise to point out, okay, I don't think this is right, and then questioning that the prompt, because sometimes when you question, it says, oh, sorry, I overlooked it, or some things like that. So definitely.
Yeah, it needs a prod in the right direction. What about on the candidate side of things? Like, what are your views on candidates using things like ChatGPT or Claude during the hiring process? Are there any steps that you would be unhappy with them using it, or do you think it's fair game now that they could use it anywhere?
Oh, I'm not sure anywhere. And also, it depends how they're using it. If they're just putting in the question or whatever is the question in your hiring questionnaire, let's say, and the chat GPT is generating it for you, that's not the right way. But if you're just giving them, like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, can you just check the grammar for me, let's say, I think that is enough. So I think there should be the level or the balance between how you are using and how much you are using and for what you're using it, because so even when the person, for example, let's say it used chat gpt and got hired, right? But once you get hired, the employer is going to know what kind of person you are compared to what you answered in the on your questionnaire. So yeah, there should be a like high level of honesty in what do you do, especially in the hiring process.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because some people would say that, well, if the hiring process is such that a candidate can just put stuff into ChatGPT and get an answer out, then either the hiring process isn't that close enough to the actual job, or it is close to the job, in which case, why do you need the person? You could just have AI to do their job if the hiring process is close to their job. So it's a, a tricky one. And so would you view candidates as using it in a very brute force way? Like, let's say, for example, you had an interview with a candidate and they had ChatGPT open at the same time, and so they were like, it was listening to, it was doing voice to text, and so it was also giving some answer options for the candidate. Candidate was kind of looking at this other screen and translating the ChatGPT stuff back into normal English and answering the questions. If they used it that way, how would you feel about that?
I won't like it because they are not their own thoughts. Yeah, that's my honest opinion. It should just be who you are. You don't have to be fluent in what you are saying. It's okay to have the ums and ums, right? But just say what do you want to say. You don't have to be grammatically right? But just say, answer the question the way you feel it rather than how the machine feels it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I was hiring some people recently, salespeople, and as part of the hiring process, there was an application and an assessment. One of the questions was, and this is like a written answer we were asking for. One of the questions was, imagine it was your first day at Alooba. What are the three things you'd need from us to give you the best chance of being successful? So it's a very personalized question where I wanted to know that exact human being's opinion. And it was amazing how many candidates still use ChatGPT for that, which I found quite surprising because it was a very opinion based thing. It was almost like sending out a survey. Like, I don't give a shit what ChatGPT thinks about this. I don't care what you think. You know what I mean?
It's not right, and especially if you're a salesperson, because that's your like the key skill is you talk and communicate. So yeah, the people definitely shouldn't use it. And nowadays, I think it becomes a bit easier as well to identify if someone is using ChatGPT to answer, because it is written in a certain way.
Any good use cases of it? Like, for example, like what one thing candidates are clearly using it for at the moment is crafting their CV to each job description. Others are using it to apply en masse to many, many roles than they could otherwise do manually themselves. Are they good use cases, or do you feel like that's still going down the wrong path? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it's still on the wrong path. Maybe crafting for a CV, it's like different job descriptions. I think it's on again a thin line, how you use it, you know. But for mass like yeah, applying a lot of job applications, I don't think, because it's not fair to the other candidates, right, who are actually giving time to apply to each and every job. So yeah.
I guess the devil's advocate to that would be, the tools out there. If you're going to be more efficient with it, why would you want to discourage that? Some people would say, especially if they're in an organization where they were very actively promoting the use of AI to be more efficient.
I'm not saying you shouldn't use AI. I think I'm just saying where to use it and where not to use it, because hiring is very personal, and yeah, like you're hiring the person and not the machine, as I'm saying. So yeah, you should be at least honest for you when you're applying to jobs.
Yeah, I feel like we should just have an honest and open conversation about it. And if anything, I feel like candidates are probably going to use it. So we should say, okay, cool. I know you're using it. How are you using it? And then we can start to get to the next level of like, oh, you're using it this way. Well, did you think of writing the prompt this way? Or why are you approaching it in this manner? And we can start to get past the first layer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, if everyone is doing that, I think that it's something we'll have to bring it into practice.
One outcome of candidates using AI seems to have been that, and this is based on anecdotal feedback, but a lot of it over the past 2 months, is that the CVs tend to start to look like each other because AI has written them based on the same job description and kind of optimize the candidate CV. And then, so the CV is looking more similar to each other. And then each job has way more applicants than normal because I think probably two factors. One is candidates are applying en masse with these tools. And then I guess the suppressed market conditions where just there's more people looking for jobs in general. So there's this weird thing where now a candidate's probably looking at LinkedIn going, oh, wow, there's 500 applicants already in a day. Are you kidding me? I thought I had to apply for 50 jobs to get one interview. I have to apply to 500 to get an interview, which is then causing probably more people to apply in this weird vicious cycle. How do we break out of this? How is this going to end? This seems like it's pretty flawed, no?
Yeah, I don't see an end to this. If Gen AI is evolving the way it is, I think it's gonna become worse if we don't try and put something, maybe have something like plagiarism in it, like we have for our, in masters, or when we submit our essays and there's plagiarized. Okay, maybe we can introduce something like that to see, okay, the skills will be similar to other CVs, but maybe the way it's written, as you said, CVs are exactly similar. So maybe that could be a better way of identifying if you're just, copy pasting from somewhere and this is not exactly who you are. So plagiarizing tools, I think, could be something that can be introduced in the hiring process.
Yeah, perhaps. And I guess what's going to happen for companies is they will have to all automate the screening step because nobody can read 1,000 applications. That's literally the numbers that some of these jobs in America in particular are getting is like thousands in the first day. So I assume they're going to automate this mainly with some kind of AI CV screening tool. Maybe they might do a skills test as a first screen, but probably they'll screen the CV first, which then means it's going to be like ChatGPT against ChatGPT in creating the CV and then screening it. Um, And yeah, who knows where this will end? Because I feel like personally, if you are using ChatGPT to write or augment your CV, surely it's going to be less truthful. To your point, like you're going to need some kind of check and balance to make sure people aren't just making up complete nonsense and sending that off.
Exactly. Yeah. It's gonna be difficult, but I hope it doesn't introduce a lot more stages to the interview process. Because right now itself, like for large companies, it's 7 rounds and like that. I hope it doesn't go to like 15 rounds because it's not fair to both employer and the job seekers. So yeah, let's see how it goes. I'm curious to see.
Yeah, so am I. I wonder if in the short run, so companies are going to be inundated with all these applicants. They won't be able to do it manually. So, like I spoke to one company last week who said, put up a job ad. They got 1,100 applications. They read the first 150. They got 5 candidates they liked. They're now interviewing them. That's it. The next 900 they didn't read because they couldn't, and they already had enough good candidates. So I think there's going to be, yeah, unfortunately, lots of people missing out and maybe not getting a fair chance because there isn't the technology in place yet to deal with the volume.
Yeah, no, you're right, and might take some time. Yeah, but should happen soon.
Yeah, and I guess that makes sense that the candidates themselves might be early adopters of AI. It's going to take any company, even a startup, longer to make decisions to implement a whole new technology or way of hiring, whereas a candidate can just start picking up any tool they like anytime they want.
Yeah.
Um, Changing the topic a little bit. So candidates are in this market at the moment, which is they're facing a lot of competition. They're looking at these jobs boards like LinkedIn. They're seeing, oh, wow, 1,000 applications. Wow, that is a lot of competition. Now, a lot of them are still then probably reacting to that, saying, well, I'm going to have to apply to more roles. So they're going to say, well, I was going to apply to 10, now I'm going to apply to 100. I'm going to automate my application process to deal with this massive amount of competition. That's one way to do it. And that's to go through the, you know, job sites as a channel. But there's another way to do it, maybe, which is to directly try to kind of get a foot in the door through some other means, maybe through your network or reaching out to the hiring manager. What is your thoughts on candidates doing that? Would you be happy for them to do that, to try to get a foot in the door directly with the hiring manager through a, let's say, nice LinkedIn or email message, or do you feel like that's just them trying to dodge the queue that they should be a part of?
Yeah, I think, yes. So they should follow the application process, because it's there for a reason. Hiring managers have their own workflows or the way they want to evaluate the candidates. And if you're approaching like through network or other way around, it might just introduce confusion. You might have a chance to the application process, but because you are approaching in the other way or going around, you might not. So yeah, I think they should follow the application process. But having said that, following up in a week or so after the application, or whether you have interviewed, I think that's fine, because it just show the eagerness that you want to work for the company, and it's not something like one of the applications that you applied from the bulk. So following up, I think, is a good strategy, but again, it depends how you're following up, because like one time I received a message on LinkedIn with just one line saying, do you have any job openings? That is it. No context, nothing like, okay, this is my name, this is what I'm looking for, this is my CV, nothing. So asking politely and following up, I think that's a good way of showing interest. But yeah, just yeah, be polite. I think that's I would say, because it shows your soft skills as well.
Yeah, I'm sure any hiring manager listening out there would have received some pretty low quality LinkedIn outreach in the past few years, similar to what you've described there. Yeah, we would get often with it's just, can I have a job? Question mark with a random CV from some random person I've never met from some country where we don't hire people, just like completely irrelevant to us and our needs, as opposed to, oh, hey, I noticed you're hiring very specific role, software engineer. I noticed it required X, Y, and Z. They're all skills I have. I just finished my last role. I live in the same city as you. Here's what I could bring to the table in some kind of personalized way. Would you be receptive to that kind of approach if it was like quite specific and personalized?
Yeah, that's good. But again, don't use ChatGPT to do that. Yeah, but no, definitely if you're introducing yourself, pointing out the skills that are similar in the JD and that you have and how you have used it, then definitely.
And what about for yourself? Imagine, God forbid, you were in the job market in a month suddenly, you were facing this stiff competition. Would you still apply yourself through jobs boards? Or would you try to perhaps leverage your network or find some other way to get a foot in the door?
Job spots, definitely. I don't want to be saying one as a hiring manager and the other thing when I'm a seeker. No, I would still go to the normal way, and then, as I said, following up after a week or so, just to check in where my application is at. So yeah,
You would, what's the phrase? You would practice what you preach, basically.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, what about thinking bigger picture now about the hiring process um, for data roles? Is there anything in particular you would like to redesign? Like if you could click your fingers and just radically change it, radically improve it, what would you do? What bit would you attack first? What would be the biggest improvement to be made, do you think?
Attack first. I think the first step will always be the initial CV screenings. I don't think that's gonna change, because as we said, the number of applicants are increasing day by day on just one job post. So, and the best way to just see, okay, if there's one applicant who ticks most of the boxes, then let's move on to the next one. So I think the CV will always be the first thing um, in the hiring process. But I'd love to hear your thoughts if you think otherwise.
I think the CV personally is not that useful because it's just someone's opinion about themselves at the end of the day. It's not really validated. I can say that I'm a rocket scientist on the CV and go and apply for a job with SpaceX. No one can stop me. I reckon I could probably get an interview at SpaceX just by writing a really great CV that's made with bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't thinking that people lying on the CV perspective. But yeah, I think, yeah, please guys don't lie on your CVs. Yeah.
No, it's a very short run strategy that, yeah, would leave me very embarrassed in my first interview at SpaceX when they're asking me stuff about physics and I don't know the slightest thing about that. So I'm not sure I'd get through the hiring process, but I think I could get a foot in the door. But yeah, I feel like the problem with a CV is that so many problems. So one is, yeah, it's someone's opinion about themselves. So it's not accurate. And I'm sure we've all had experiences of interviewing someone who looked amazing on paper, only to be very disappointed when they don't seem to know anything that they claim to know. Um, but then there's the bias step, which we discussed earlier around people's names and ethnicity and gender and religion, all these things that come across on a CV that, at least if a human's doing the reviewing, you can't really get rid of easily. And so I feel like there's an opportunity for a more objective screening step. The problem, though, is I think data quality because we only have a CV. There's so much more we want to know about a candidate, but we just don't have that data yet at that point. Like we would love to know their personality, their intelligence, their skills, how well they fit to the role, but those are only data points that are collected later at the moment. Um, so I feel like we need that data, but we need it earlier.
Yeah, now that I think of it after discussing, I feel what can be changed is maybe then rather having no specific formats for CV, have questions or a universal CV format, with specific questions, and those things should be in there. And that way we could collect those data points that you were talking about. And I think that could be a better way than having a system automated based on those data points, because now every CV in the world is going to contain those data points, rather than having, because people design CVs the way they like. They don't usually contain all the information that you need. So maybe having a structured format might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think in Europe there is Europass. Is that right? I think it's a CV format that is becoming quite common now. I'm not sure how closely they dictate the exact form, but I've seen a lot of them over the years. Um, I'm sure it's Europass. Europass, or is that a train ticket? Maybe I'm getting the two mixed up.
Yeah, I think it's a train ticket, or maybe.
Yeah, it's a European Union style CV, Europass. There's some connection to the actual EU in it. I think they have like some standardized template that people use, but yeah, it's not like everyone uses it, so it's still not 100% universal. Um, I feel like still the issue, even if we had that, is still the validation bit is missing, because maybe the validation and the subjectivity, because it's like I could say I've advanced SQL skills. What does that mean? I've advanced Excel. Is that a pivot table or is that VBA? It's down to your interpretation a little bit.
Yeah. Or then maybe at some point, those skill tests, skill assessments on LinkedIn might be helpful to check box if the skill that the person has mentioned is actually the skill that person possess. So yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I think there has to be some kind of validation. What would be an interesting business actually is a company that sits in between the candidates and the hiring companies, because pretty much every company wants to know a very similar set of things about candidates. But it's very annoying for a candidate to have to go and repeat yourself 50 times to 50 different companies explaining your SQL skills or demonstrating a certain value or a soft skill. So if there could be some intermediary that validated all that data and then just shared it with companies, in theory, that would save a lot of time. But
I'm thinking Alooba.
we don't do that bit. Maybe one day, but yeah, we don't sit there at the moment. But yeah, hopefully someone solves that problem and finds a way to make money from it, because it would save everyone a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. Time is money.
Exactly. Uh, what about this curly question? If you could ask our next guest one question about anything you like in the world, what would that question be?
Mm, Now, this is something very basic, and we kind of discussed in our introductory call. Is SQL an essential skill to have for if you're hiring for any data role, like data analyst, data scientist, or a data engineer? Because as I told you, I have heard mixed opinions, right? From my opinion is it is extremely important, because whichever role in you are, you have to do some exploratory analysis in SQL, right, just to get to know the data. So I feel it's extremely essential. But what I noticed was, when we did our hiring the last time, only 1 out of 10 candidates had SQL on them, and they all were recent graduates, uh, graduating from a data course. I don't know what has changed between the time I graduated and this recent one, like what the course is changing. Maybe the courses are prioritizing more advanced skills, but I feel the basics, the foundational fundamentals should never leave, you know? So, because it's still important in the practical life. So that would be my next question, or my question to the next guest.
Well, we'll level that at the next guest, and yeah, it's an interesting one and so fascinating that the qualifications. These are university graduates from like undergraduate degrees in data science, and they have not been taught SQL.
Yeah, undergraduate or even postgraduates, and they knew. So one of the candidate knew no SQL, but no SQL. So SQL is an essential skill for us, whatever work we do in our day-to-day life. So my first question, or one of my questions, if we are talking about SQL, is like, do you know a difference between union and a union all, which is very basic. And they're like, sorry, we don't know. And I was like, okay. It's like, yeah. And given that this is something mentioned in the job description, right, that SQL is essential, I feel it's courtesy from the job or the candidate side as well, that they should read something about or mention that, okay, I'm taking a course to build up on it. And that again shows that ability to learn, or the growth thing. So, yeah, it's very interesting and shocking for me.
Yeah, I would also be shocked with that. And yeah, I personally feel right now absolutely essential for any data role. I wonder though if that is changing quickly where for all coding languages, not just scripting languages like SQL, if a large language model could now, maybe not now, but very soon, maybe could be doing all the coding for us and we're just going to interact with it using natural language, then maybe at some point it's going to be redundant. But that point isn't yet.
Yeah, I don't think, at least in near future, it's gonna become redundant.
No, it's the language that doesn't die, I think. Was it IBM or one of those companies created SQL in the 60s? Like it's really old.
Very, yes, exactly. And if it hasn't died yet, then yeah,
Yeah. It's like the spreadsheet. It keeps living on the cockroach of the business world.
very well put. Yeah,
Well, Mrunal, it's been a great conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. We've covered off a lot of ground, and I'm sure our audience has enjoyed your insights and thoughts.
me too. Thank you so much again, Tim. Thank you for the opportunity and reaching out to me.